I was born in Pomerania in a butcher's family. After graduating from school, I used to work as a shepherd and as a farmhand. I spent only a brief period in the Hitler Youth. I was in the RAD, the Reich Labor Service, a large organization in Nazi Germany devoted to the elimination of mass joblessness, the militarization and the ideological indoctrination of the employable population, and spent about a half a year with it. I was drafted into the army in 1939. At first it was in the French campaign. Then our unit was sent to Czechoslovakia, whence I found myself on the Eastern Front. We were at somewhere near Orel. We were equipped with 3 anti-tank guns. The weather was extremely cold. It was impossible to dig a dugout because of the hardness of the ground caused by the snow, so we had to build our dugouts out of the snow. The temperature was 20 or 30 degrees below zero. This is true. We put pine branches on the floor, then rubberized raincoats. We covered ourselves with the same raincoats and blankets requisitioned from the Russians. But my nose was still not hidden from the cold. There was much to remember. Joy, misery, and hunger. There was also a situation when I was knocked out next to a cannon after a direct hit. While I was lying there, the thought crossed my mind. Here I am now, a dead man. I was in charge of a gun crew that day. I had been a machine gunner before that, but it was me who took the command from the wounded commander. It was pretty quick. That morning I told the guys on my crew that I was going to be on the guard between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Standing on the guard, I noticed that the Russians had started shooting at us. One by one, a mine fell. One by one, a shell fell. The explosions came closer and closer. And then, the Stalin organ, a Soviet rocket mortar, went on. Okay, I thought, I need to find some place to hide. I sat down behind the gun shield, shrunk myself into a ball, and right in a second, a shell struck the gun. That left wheel that I was leaning against flew off for hundreds of meters. I was lying on the ground for some time between the gun mounts, covered with sand and bush branches. My only thought was, here's the way it feels to be a dead man. Truthfully, that's what it was like. I do remember it clearly. No idea of how long it lasted. I was trembling, but not because I was scared. I examined myself to make sure I wasn't bleeding. I tried to look and see whether my arms and legs were okay, but I was not able to. Then, I felt myself coming to my senses. Thank God. I had not lost a single drop of blood. Do you want me to explain to you how to fire an anti-tank gun? The tank is 600 meters away from you and is zigzagging left and right, in which case you use the swivel lever. When your enemy tank is 400 meters away, you turn the handle a little, and when it is 600 meters away, you turn it a little more to the left, thus turning the telescopic sight. That way, you create a deflection. The tank is supposed to cross the path of the projectile flight. Because it takes some time to do this flight. It is not that fast, although it depends on the distance. It also depends on a lot of other things, too. Our gun had a shallow trajectory of the shot, so it reached the target faster. But you should realize that in 3 seconds a tank passes a distance of 2 of its own length. But of course, it also depends on the speed at which the tank goes. Therefore you should make up your mind about that, too. I was aiming at the very nose, and the tank was moving into the field of shot, getting the shell in its very middle if it was the right moment to shoot. So I worked at it time and time again. Every time we were forced to drop the gun, we were instructed to break the gun's optics at whatever cost, or to take the sight with us. It was one day in 1943 when the Russian tanks marched into the attack. My comrade, Herman, and the other guys in our crew were in the truck. The truck pulled away, and I was left to fend for myself, so I had to rush to the gun to remove the sight. Anyway, this incident could have resulted in a court-martial for me, because I couldn't stop the soldiers from pulling to the rear. So I removed the sight and ran to the rear. Right there, a Russian tank came up ahead of me. Man, it's about time to turn around, I thought, and turned into the bushes to my left. Something made me think that our guys might have been somewhere in that direction. The Russian tanks appeared somewhere to my right, just 15 paces away, and then I came across an officer with a gun in his hands. There's a bunch of tanks behind us. No way we can get through there. Yeah, the officer said, their infantry broke through. There's no path for us here. So I started to move on, but the officer turned around and said, boy, what are we going to do next? There are 3 bullets left in my pistol. I had only a pistol. Also, that was how a crew or platoon commander used to be armed, but I still got plenty of ammunition. I pulled over. There, we lay in the bush, careful to keep the enemy in sight. We waited for nightfall. Then, all of a sudden, the sound of rumbling was heard, and the third tank in the column of Russians caught fire. Immediately after that, another tank, the nearest to us, was destroyed. Its crew got out of the car and started running straight to us. Would you believe it or not? The Russians got down behind a bush. To our right. One of the Russians crawled back to the tank. There was no fire, but the tank was disabled. He climbed inside and threw a carbine out of there. During these 15 minutes, I think 3 or more tanks were hit. However, the Russians had a carbine in their hands now, but they never noticed us. We dashed over to where it seemed our positions were. Nothing was fired at us. We were running and waving our hands. No one wanted to get killed by our guys. It was a hell of a day. I received a badge for destroying a tank of the enemy. I destroyed 3 tanks in close combat, even not using anti-tank weapons. In general, I burned those tanks not by myself. If I did it alone, I would have received a gold badge, but I had only a silver one. It was done with a guy named Willie Korsh. This guy was a farmer, a rough kid, but a good soldier. I wondered to myself about how he did it. The Russian tank pulled up right in front of us in a dense bush. The day was dawning, but it was still dark. At first, Willie ran out to grab a can of gasoline and set fire to the third tank in the column. Then we set fire to the first tank. Then it happened with the tank in the middle. There was only one Russian guy, an extremely big one, who made it out, but we shot him. I was even given a special leave as a result of that fight. A soldier with this badge looked like he stood out among the others at the time. I remember there was an officer who several times remarked to me, "I envy any man who has such a badge." The summer of 1944, I was captured near the town of Bobruisk and spent a further 5 years in Russia. The following story is what happened. All of a sudden, 15 tanks turned up not far from us in sight. By that moment, there was already a lot of fighting, so we were going to change positions, when my friend Herman took a look into the barrel of the gun and said, first we have to clean the barrel of the muzzle. The brush was lost and I said, "Man, you gotta push your cap through the muzzle." Any other case it could have ended in a barrel explosion. Somehow, I got through that. While we were cleaning the barrel, the tanks continued to move, and I shouted, "Hurry up. Come on, hurry up. Have we got an armor-piercing shell?" The Russians were shooting at us since they already spotted our gun, even though we were behind the garden fence. I shouted out the information about the distance, and suddenly, the shell exploded just in front of us. Herman was down. He was on the ground calling to me, "Klaus, help me, hurry." Everyone else remained frozen in place, as if no one knew what to do. His guts were spilling out. I pulled out my first aid kit and bandaged him quickly. "Herman, get your wheel together and run to the truck," I told him. He answered, "I'm a strong guy, I can handle it." But he died. It was the day the war was over for both of us. A man in war should comprehend the art of war. You should always use your ears. Moreover, not to say that I was not more scared than the other men. We all had our fears. A man does not exist without fear for his life. You need to know the difference between the rumble of a gunshot and the rumble of a shell bursting after it, or the difference between a mortar or a cannon attack. And in fact, there is a difference. You should be smart to read where a mine or shell will explode so you can get to the ground in time. I used to always do it pretty fast because they were dropping nearby. At least 100 times they fell within a dozen meters away from me, I could say. But it wasn't like every shell flying toward me made me drop to the ground. Absolutely not. I was just a soldier who was able to see everything that was happening properly. It was something I had a feeling for, whether it was our shell or the enemy's, the direction, and if the shells were falling in scatters. I meant that I had to watch out for it at all times. I was not trying my luck, but the reason for that was not fear. That is all for today. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and support the channel with a subscription. Goodbye to everyone and see you soon.